Hello, Adams. This is episode 3 of our Eureka unit, and we're going to focus on research today. So here is your vocab. Airborne means in flight. Charred means burnt. A diaphragm is a thin disc of material that vibrates when producing or receiving sound waves. Dim means not bright. Drawbacks are disadvantages or problems. Ecosystems are systems formed by the interaction of communities of organisms with their environment. So an ecosystem is everything that is in a certain environment, the living things and the non-living things. The English Channel is a body of water that separates England and France. Evaporate is to change from liquid into a gas. Illumination means brightness. Inspire means to lead to. Intricate means detailed or complicated. Isolated means far away from other things or people, so by themselves, far away. Parchment is animal skin that is used as a writing surface. A pendulum is a weighted lever that regulates the speed of a clock. Potential are qualities that may be developed to lead to future successes. So if you have potential, that means you can be really good at something. A sundial is an instrument that shows the time used with the sun. It helps you tell time with the sun. A telegraph is a machine that sends messages across long distances. Tinker means to work at something. Transmitter is equipment that sends messages or signals like radio or television. And a vaccine is a medicine to help people immune to diseases. We're not going to use all those words because we're not going to do every invention today, but they're there if you need them. So the first invention we're going to talk about is the light bulb. So every invention we're going to answer, you're going to answer these questions. So you're going to tell me, how does it work? What was used before that was invented? How did it change things? And what would the world be like if it never existed? So we're going to describe a situation that would be different if this invention was never created. All right, so here is the light bulb. Before the light bulb, in the dark. For most of human history, people got up at sunrise and didn't do much after sunset because there wasn't much light indoors, and traveling in the dark was dangerous. People could easily get lost or fall and hurt themselves. Of course, people lit their homes before the light bulb, but there were lots of drawbacks to these early sources of light. Candles, for example, didn't give off much light. Wood fires took a lot of effort to build and gave off unwanted heat when the weather was warm. Some species of whales almost became extinct because the oil in their blubber was used as fuel for oil lamps. Accidental fires were a problem with all of these light sources, and with the gas lamps that became popular in the 19th century. Inventing the light bulb, Edison's innovation. Electric lights existed before Thomas Edison's light bulb, but they were expensive and unreliable, and the lighting was very dim. One reason is that early inventors could not come up with a proper filament, which is the tiny wire that runs through the center of a light bulb. When the filament heats up, it glows, which is the source of the bulb's light. Before Edison, inventors made filaments from metals that would catch fire at the slightest heat. As a result, the bulbs burnt out very quickly, or the filament would burn so hot that the bulb would explode. Starting in 1878, Edison experimented for 2 years before he came up with a charred bamboo filament that provided 1,200 hours of illumination. How the light bulb changed things, the impact. As a smart businessman, Edison realized the potential in selling both light bulbs and electricity. He quickly started a company to supply electricity to customers, and in 1882, his first power station lit up 59 homes in New York City. Almost every part of our lives has been affected by electric light. Think about all the things people do before sunrise or after sunset that would not have been possible before the light bulb. Today, factories would have to shut down at night, around the clock because of the light. Today, factories would have shut down at night, can run around the clock because of the light bulb. Sorry, that was a confusing sentence. The headlights on all sorts of vehicles, including ambulances and fire engines, allow for safe travel after dark. And nighttime activities that we take for granted, from sleepovers to concerts to reading in bed, would be more difficult or impossible without electric light. The light bulb also led to lots of other inventions, because once electric outlets were installed in homes, many inventors realized that things other than lamps could be plugged into these outlets. Then they got all busy inventing all sorts of home appliances, like the toaster, dishwasher, and electric fan, that make our lives easier and more comfortable. All right, so you're going to answer those 4 questions. And now we're going to write a letter to Thomas Edison about how great the light bulb is. Your letter should be about 2 paragraphs. And think about the story of the light bulb you want to tell. As you develop your letter, you may want to think about information you learned about Mr. Edison's personality and life from his inventor card. So again, 2 paragraphs, so that should be more than 5 sentences. You're going to say, the light bulb is truly a great invention because blank. So give me at least 5 different sentences that talk about why the light bulb is a good invention. All right, here's the telephone. Before the telephone, voiceless communication. For thousands of years, the only way for most people to stay in touch with those who lived far away from them was through the mail. And letters could take weeks or even months to arrive. In the middle of the 19th century, an inventor called the telegraph was revolutionizing long-distance communication around the world. With the telegraph, an operator in one city could transmit a message to an operator in another city in minutes by sending an electric current over a wire. The telegraph did have some drawbacks, however. Most importantly, the telegraph could not transmit sound, only a complicated code of clicks that few people could understand. People couldn't hold back and forth conversations over a telegraph line. They had to go to special telegraph offices to give their messages to an operator to send, which meant messages were never completely private, and sending a message over the telegraph might require a lot of traveling if you didn't live in a city or town with an office. Inventing the telephone, the voice. The telegraph proved that electrical signals could be sent across a wire. Alexander Graham Bell aimed to send the human voice across the wire by turning it into electrical signals. In 1875, he was tinkering in his lab when he accidentally spilled acid on his plants. He called to his assistant, Thomas Watson, who was in the next room, where the receiver of Bell's invention sat on the table. Eureka! Watson heard Bell's voice coming out of the machine, the first phone call. Bell worked on improving the invention, and the next year, he and Watson had a telephone conversation over a distance of 2 miles. When Bell spoke into the telephone, his voice caused a thin piece of parchment, the diaphragm, to vibrate. A magnet turned these vibrations into electricity that traveled over the telephone line. At Watson's end, a second magnet and diaphragm turned the electrical signal back into sound vibrations. How the telephone changed things, a ringing success. By 1886, more than 100,000 Americans had telephones in their homes. The country, and eventually the world, became much more connected because people were able to pick up their phones and speak to anyone, anywhere. Businesses saved money, as meetings that had once required long-distance travel could now be held over the phone. People who lived in isolated areas were now able to call for help in an emergency. News traveled more quickly, and long-distance friendships became possible. Eventually, the telephone put the telegraph out of business and became one of the most successful inventions of all time. So same thing, what does it do? What did they use before it was invented? How did it change things? And one situation that would be different without the telephone. All right, we've got one letter from Thomas Edison. Let's see what he has to say.
Well, from what I've seen and heard so far, you seem to be doing a solid job on your analysis of the light bulb. Not everyone knows all the details of its illustrious history, but your research skills are serving you well. Let's make things a little more interesting. I am in the final proof stage of my book. I judge inventions. Obviously, the light bulb is the most important invention of all time, and the light bulb is going on the front cover. But the back cover needs art too. One of the inventions after which your labs are named, but only one, can be that back cover art. Convince me that it should be yours.
Okay, so you're going to convince him that it should be yours by giving some information about the airplane and the paper. So here's paper. Before paper, a record-keeping nightmare. Throughout most of history, only a small amount of human knowledge was ever written down. Most knowledge was communicated through spoken words. This meant that what a person knew was limited to what he or she could remember. One reason for this is that writing was very inconvenient. The writing surface made from the papyrus plant in ancient Egypt was extremely fragile. In other parts of the world, people wrote on vellum, a parchment made from animal skin. But vellum was expensive and time-consuming to produce. Almost 2,000 years ago, around the year 105, a man named Kai Lun was keeping official government records for the Chinese Emperor He of Han. At that time in China, people wrote on silk, which was very expensive, or on scrolls of bamboo, which were very heavy and difficult to manufacture. Kai Lun was frustrated with his choices and believed he could come up with a better option, a writing surface that was light, cheap, and easy to make. Inventing paper. Kai Lun experimented with lots of different materials and methods before discovering his winning formula. He mixed tree bark, old cloth, and discarded pieces of rope and fishing nets in a big kettle of boiling water. As the water evaporated, he mashed up the mush that was left into a paste, which he then set to dry on screens in thin layers. As they dried, these layers of Kai Lun's strange mixture hardened into the first sheets of paper. Kai Lun's lightweight invention made writing, transporting, and storing records much easier. Emperor He was very pleased. He rewarded Kai Lun with great wealth. Neither of them could have predicted that a few hundred years later, the Chinese would find two new uses for Kai Lun's invention that would be hugely popular: money, paper money, and toilet paper. How things changed. Kai Lun's invention changed civilization. People could now spread knowledge of science, literature, and art over great distances by carrying paper documents with them when they traveled. Paper also helped people communicate across hundreds and even thousands of years because stories, poems, artwork, and history could now be recorded, stored, and copied over generations. By allowing political thinkers to share their ideas with many people, paper also toppled mighty kings and brought about great revolutions. For example, Tom Paine's Common Sense, a pamphlet that inspired the American Revolution, would not have been read up and down the 13 colonies if it had not been printed on paper. Paper is also used for fun. Coloring books, comics, crosswords, and novels would not exist without paper. Through the spread of books, paper has enabled billions of people to learn to read, receive an education, and read for pleasure. All right, the airplane. Before the airplane, human beings first flew in the year 1783 in a hot air balloon. But people wanted to do more than float in the sky. In the 1800s, a German man named Otto Lilienthal made over 2,000 flights in gliders, motorless aircraft that ride air currents as a bird does in between flapping its wings. As new and more powerful engines were developed, lots of inventors attached them to aircraft frames and tried to fly. They failed because they didn't understand that successful flight requires a pilot to balance and control the aircraft. Orville and Wilbur Wright understood the importance of control. That's why they practiced flying and steering gliders for 2 years before building the Flyer, their first motorized plane. They succeeded in keeping the Flyer airborne at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina in 1903 because they had installed controls to keep the plane balanced and steady. Afterward, they continued experimenting for 2 more years, eventually building the Flyer 3. That plane had improved controls to adjust its pitch, roll, and yaw. These controls are still found on airplanes today. They help planes take off, land, and fly much more safely, especially in bad weather or high winds. It wasn't long before people saw the potential of the Wright brothers' invention. Planes began carrying mail in 1911. In 1914, at the start of World War I, France and Germany used airplanes for military purposes for the first time, permanently changing how wars are fought. I'm going to skip down here. Hundreds of millions of people travel on airplanes every year. I'm going to stop because I'm running out of time. I can only do 15 seconds. So again, what do? What did they do before it was invented? 2 ways it changed. And if this had never existed, how would today be different? Have a great day. I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.